Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to talk about the eclipses because I feel like everybody in the church should be excited for this. And I was thinking about this last night and I wanted to actually make this video last night, but I ran out of time, and it's kind of a good thing that I did because I guess I had some time to sleep on it and I woke up and I had this realization. I never thought about this when it comes to the eclipses. So I'll get to that in just a minute. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I never know, because there's always people joining the channel, and I don't know how much you've been following stuff that's been talked about in this LDS Second Coming community. Maybe this is the first time that you're starting to think about the Second Coming. Like, seriously, I have no idea. So let me explain it. So back in 2017, which was the last year of President Monson's presidency, there was the Great American Eclipse. That's what they called it, right? And it went across the United States from coast to coast, which is more on the unusual side. It's rarer for it to go across the entire continent. That's what I've read before. And that eclipse, people noticed different things about it. People said, for example, that it went over 7 cities named Salem, which I'm not entirely sure about that. I want to say one time I tried to look all that up, or somebody pointed out, well, this one isn't really it used to be a city, but it's not anymore. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I looked into that. But the thing that interested me the most is that it went over the Kansas City area. That's where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, is in the East Kansas City metro area, specifically in Independence, Missouri. So what happened is the path of totality. That's where you have to be in order to get the full effect of the eclipse, to experience a full eclipse where you're actually in the shadow and experience a full eclipse. And it's a pretty, relatively speaking, it's a narrow path. Okay. So, for example, I was in Arizona at the time, and using my really nice, expensive welding mask, I was able to look up at the sun and see it, but it wasn't a full eclipse. And by the way, that welding mask, it was worth every penny. It was like $300, but it was fully automatic. You didn't have to calibrate it, or it was fully right out of the box. It was already ready to go. So, but if you were in the Kansas City area, at least I'm not sure if it was the entire thing, but if you were into Independence, Missouri, where the New Jerusalem is going to be built, the center place, you would have experienced the full eclipse. But not just Independence, Missouri, but all the way up to Adirondack, which is north and a little bit to the east of there. And that was just within the northern limit of the path. And we've looked at this before in the channel. If you move the path very much by just a couple miles, then both those locations would not be in the path of totality. So I found that really interesting, and I still do, because those are two highly, highly important locations to the church. The plan is still to build the New Jerusalem in Jackson County, in Independence, Missouri. And we all know that Adirondack is incredibly significant. That's where, so it's been revealed that the Garden of Eden is in the Kansas City area, in the area of Independence, right? I'm presuming that's why that's going to be the New Jerusalem. And so that's significant. But when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, I guess they went up north and a little bit to the east, and they stayed in Adam-on-Diamond. And before Adam passed away, there was a grand council, a council of Adam-on-Diamond, a gathering of all his righteous posterity. Christ appeared premortally, and Adam prophesied of everything that's going to happen to all the way until the last generation. Okay. And a similar conference, meeting, council is going to happen before Christ comes again. And I have a playlist about this. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the details. If you want to know everything that there is to know, as far as I know about Adamantiaman, I've covered it in the playlist. Like every source that's available that I know of at the moment, I've covered it in that playlist. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a similar council. Uh, there's going to be different things happening there. It, some of the things are unclear, but in some kind of way, everyone that's held priesthood keys is going to be there and is going to report what they did with priesthood keys, and the keys are going to go back to Christ, which I think it just means that currently Adam, he's the one that's delegated the keys through all these last 6,000 years. It's under his authority that happens, which of course is under Christ, but he's the one that held that position. And when Christ comes, he's going to be the one that now does that, because now he's here and he's also going to be king of the world and everything else. So there's that. There's also going to be judgment during that time. Just go watch the playlist. So that's a really important location. It could be that the first sessions of Adamantiaman have already happened. I'd talk about that in the playlist as well. So both these places, highly, highly, highly significant. And that's where the 2017 eclipse passed over. And remember, I think it was August when this happened. That was only a few months before President Nelson became president of the church in January of 2018. So it was at the very end of President Monson's presidency, and then just a few months before President Nelson took the reins. Okay? So everyone was really excited about this, not just within the church, but other Christians that are into eschatology, which is study of the last days, because they realized that there was going to be another eclipse in 2024. And it's coming up pretty soon. It's going to be on the 8th of April, 2024. So these two eclipses are roughly spaced out by 7 years. So that gets everybody's attention, because 7, it's a holy number. And this one, it goes like the opposite direction. So you have one that comes diagonally this way, you have the other one that comes diagonally the opposite way, and they make an X over the United States. And so other Christians are interested in that because they view it as a sign that, look, the United States is becoming really wicked, and so it's probably a bad sign, when you have an X that's being drawn over the United States and it like goes over the heartland. The intersection point is in a place called Carbondale, Illinois. So it's not in Missouri, it's in Carbondale, Illinois. But anyway, that's how they view it. But me, not so much. I mean, maybe that's part of it. That, I don't know. Yeah, that could be. But there's two more parts to it. So before that eclipse, before the 2024 eclipse, we have to go back just a little bit to the October eclipse that happened just last year in 2023. That eclipse went through Utah. Okay. I don't need to tell you how important Utah is to the church, because that's where church headquarters is. And after the saints were driven out of their different locations in the east, they came and settled in Utah and have been there for a long time, ever since, the days of 1847. Okay, so it went through Utah, but it didn't just go through Utah. It didn't go over Salt Lake City. But what it did do is it went through a portion of the state where there are no temples, except for two. One is the Monticello, Utah temple, which is in the southeast part of the state, relatively close to like the Four Corners and in Moab. I say relatively close. And then it also went over the Manti temple, and I think possibly also the Ephraim temple, but the Ephraim temple is not yet in operation or fully constructed, and the Manti temple at the time was out of commission for renovations. So the only operating temple that it went over was the Monticello, Utah temple. And I've shown this on Google Earth. I'm not going to do it now, but it had to take that path in order to miss all the other temples in Utah, which are not a few. So it was very unlikely that if any eclipse was going to go over Utah, that if the path of totality going through Utah, it was very unlikely that it would take that path of all paths. Okay. So first we have the Adirondack, Independence, Missouri, and you can also say Far West eclipse in 2017. And then you have the Utah eclipse that just happened to miss all the temples, or the most temples possible. And then the one that's coming up in April 8th of 2024, it's the day after conference. Okay, it's the day after conference that this happens, which is really interesting. But not only that, it's first going to go over, like in this order, it's first going to go over the Sacred Grove, right? The event that started this whole thing, this whole dispensation, it started in the Sacred Grove with Joseph Smith having the vision of God the Father and Jesus Christ. And then after that, it's going to go down into the west, and it's going to go over Kirtland, Ohio, the location of the first temple in this dispensation. The first temple in a very long time, almost a couple thousand years. A place where Jesus Christ appeared, and also various prophets from different dispensations to give their keys to Joseph Smith. Okay. So this is highly unlikely. It's such a short span of time, just about a little bit less than 7 years. Okay. I don't know what the odds are. I don't even know how to calculate them. But for these 3 eclipses in a row to go over major church sites, I think it's very, 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 very unlikely. And I feel like this is something that every member of the church should be aware of at the very least, but also be really thinking about, because it means something, and what it means, I don't know. It could be anything from, within this window of time, something significant's going to happen that has to do with the second coming. For example, maybe Adirondack is going to be complete by the time that, the last eclipse comes, or maybe the second coming itself. It could be any number of things. Don't know, but we should definitely pay attention. Now, the realization that I had just a few moments ago, as I was waking up, is that this seems to be actually kind of a timeline, only in reverse. And what I mean is that the last eclipse goes over the very first significant locations of this dispensation, the Sacred Grove, and then Kirtland, Ohio, the place of the first temple in this dispensation. And then after that, if we're going back in time, then after that, just a few months before, 6 months before, then it's in Utah, right? And then you have to go all the way back to 2017, and then you have the New Jerusalem in Adirondack. And I feel like that fits really well, because the early church was only in these locations, Palmyra and Kirtland, for a short time. Okay. And then you could also include Nauvoo, and then the attempt to build the New Jerusalem in Missouri. That part of church history was very short. Just like the relative distance between the 2024 eclipse and the October 2023 eclipse, very short period of time. And then from the Utah eclipse, which would correspond with the saints arriving in Utah, from that eclipse back to 2017, that's a much longer period of time. Just like how the majority of this dispensation church headquarters has been in Salt Lake City. And then at some point, it is going to move to Jackson County again. again, I have a playlist for this too, for the New Jerusalem. There's some misunderstanding, misconception that it's actually like Salt Lake City is now the New Jerusalem. It's not. And I know that for a fact because it's been repeated over and over and over again. It's in church manuals. The plan is still to build it in Jackson County, Missouri. I do have a theory though, and I've done videos about this, how it seems to me that the Exodus story it's like a metaphor, a foreshadowing. Um, it's symbolic of other things. Okay. For example, if you think about Abraham inheriting the land, okay, when he was brought to Canaan, he was given the land by the Lord. And then he has his son Isaac, and then he has his son Jacob, and then you have the 12 sons, right? So they're given this land, and they live there, but then they're brought down into Egypt because there's a famine, right? I've thought in my mind, I don't think I've seen this in any church material. I'm not saying that this is doctrine, but I see a similarity between. Don't worry, I'm getting back to the eclipses. Just wait, and I'm getting back to Salt Lake City. But I've kind of like noticed that seems kind of similar to how the way that we started is we started in the presence of God, right? In the pre-mortal existence. And we were shown what we could have, but we had to come down to earth first, prove ourselves worthy, repent, make good choices, choose what we want to do, through our choices. And so we start there and we're shown what can be, but we have to come to earth because there's no other way to progress. It's like a famine in the land. You have to go to earth and have a mortal experience before you can come back and possess the land, right? And so Israel, his sons, they go down into Egypt, which would represent the world in this mortal experience. And at first it's like good, but then, after a while, after a couple generations, they're now in bondage, just like how you and I are under the bondage of sin. And we continually push against that by living the commandments, being on the covenant path, repenting. And it's an ongoing process until the end of our lives. But we're in this place of bondage. And Israel was led by Moses, and Moses is like a symbol of Christ. They're led out of the world. They're led out of Egypt, and then through the Red Sea, which is like baptism, right? And then after that, they receive the law. They receive the 10 Commandments, and and then the Lord's presence is there at Mount Sinai. That could be roughly equivalent to, receiving the Holy Ghost, being led by the Holy Ghost. And then they don't immediately go back to the land of Canaan and possess it again. They have to wait until these older generations that still have Egypt in them, essentially. The Lord has them wait until those that earlier generation has all passed away. Just like how I think in this life, we're influenced by the world. It saturates us. But when we come across Christ, whether you're a convert or if you were born into this church, there's some point when you're truly converted. And then from that point forward, you're working through this process to de-Egyptianize yourself, to live the commandments more perfectly, to repent and just be led by the Lord and the Spirit. Okay, so the idea is hopefully you are better by the time you die than when you started. Hopefully you've done the sufficient amount of repentance, for when your judgment day comes. That's why we have to just keep working at it all the time, every day, because you never know when you're going to die. But in the case of Israel, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then at that time, once those older generations had passed away, It was now time to go back to the promised land, and they go through the River Jordan, which you could view as the veil, passing through the veil. And once they get there, they take possession of the land. Okay, and then everything's good. It's obviously more complicated than that, but they come back to where they started. It's like how you and I ideally we're in the presence of the Father. We come to earth, we work out our salvation, pass through the veil, and then we're back in the presence of the Father. That's hopefully what as many people as possible will choose to do. Okay. So there's that kind of, I feel like a very good foreshadowing, or not really foreshadowing, but like metaphor of our own lives. Okay. Likewise, I think that you can also compare this to like this last dispensation, in the sense that I've talked about how when Joshua and the Israelites took Jericho, that story seems to me to be a foreshadowing of the second coming. And the reason why, the whole reason why this came on my radar is because I was doing a study into seven trumpets, because I noticed that there were a few different times in the scriptures that you see seven trumpets. So you see it in the book of Revelation, where the angels blow seven trumpets. You see it in Doctrine and Covenants section 88, where in that section there's two sets of seven trumpets. There's a total of 14 trumpets in section 88. But then if you go back to the story of Jericho, that's the first time that you come across this, motif of seven trumpets. But in this case, it was seven priests that were blowing the shofar, which is a ram's horn. And what's interesting is, you remember that Israel encompassed the city. They went around the city for 7 days. And for the first 6 days, they blew the trumpets once. I'm trying to remember the story. I'm pretty sure this is how it went. They blew their trumpets once. But then in the seventh day, they blew the trumpets, I think, 7 times. And I feel like what that represents is the 7,000-year history of this earth. How in the first 6,000 years, the warning call goes out, the gospel is preached, you have these different dispensations, but it's kind of limited to what it's going to be like in the millennium. Everything that we've studied so far on this channel, everything we've learned from Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie, and others when it comes to the millennium, is that's going to be like the great day of the gospel spreading across the earth. To such an extent that at some point during the millennium, everyone will have been converted to the gospel. So it's going to become worldwide at that point. But the 6,000 years before, no, it's like very limited because the majority of people reject the gospel. Okay, so what happened was they came. You have the story of Jericho, which to me clearly points to the future and the second coming, when the walls of Jericho, or the walls of this world, fall. The kingdoms, the nations, the power, it all falls, and it falls to Christ and his kingdom. It yields to Christ. He takes over, right? And so they go through this like series of conquests throughout the land. And then they finally settle. But what happens is you have the tabernacle that's been with them ever since Moses, right? Pretty early on during the wandering. But it doesn't initially go to Jerusalem. Even though the Lord knows that that's where that's going to be one of the capital cities, right? During the millennium, it's New Jerusalem and Jerusalem. Even though I think the Israelites knew that that's where Melchizedek was, because Melchizedek's city was Salem. In fact, by the way, it seems that Melchizedek's temple, which is just a tiny little, like a stone structure, it's been discovered. in the original Salem, which is called um, the city of David. And once David conquered it from the Jebusites, it became Jerusalem. That was like the original Jerusalem, just this tiny piece of land. And in that land, archaeologists have found a temple there that has an altar. It also has like the type of altar that you kneel at, like in our temples. They call it a matseva. And it also has symbols that you would recognize if you go into the temple that are carved into the floor of one of the other rooms. You should look it up. Search my channel for Melchizedek Temple, or just do a Google search. It seems that they found it. So anyway, the point is, the tabernacle was not, it didn't immediately go to Jerusalem. Okay. So let's start to make a parallel here. So we know where New Jerusalem is. It's in Jackson County, Missouri. It's in Independence. That's the center place. But is the Salt Lake Temple in New Jerusalem? No, it's not. It's in Salt Lake City. And what happened was the tabernacle, instead of going to Jerusalem, it went to Shiloh. And it was there for, I think it was like 300 years. It was there for like 300 years before finally, you come to the time of David. He wasn't allowed to build the temple because of his transgression, but his son Solomon built the first, for them, the first permanent temple, Solomon's temple, made out of stone. So it may be the same thing with us. You have the Joshua event, the second coming that happens. And then in the process of things, the world all comes under control of Christ. And we don't just immediately go to New Jerusalem and have that become the headquarters. It may be that Salt Lake City is the Shiloh. It's going to be the Shiloh for however long. And then in the process of time and in order, that it's going to be transferred over to the New Jerusalem. And I know that some of you are probably saying, well, that's not right because the New Jerusalem is supposed to be built up before the second coming. Go watch my playlist called New Jerusalem, because we've studied how New Jerusalem, or Zion, is a people. It's a people. And that's what the church is focusing on, is developing a Zion people. As far as like the literal aspects of it, there is a temple right now in Independence, Missouri. We've looked into this too. We've looked at the diary of Alvin R. Dyer. He was a very special apostle, never part of the Quorum of the 12. He had a special mission. He immediately, I think they set him apart as an apostle, and then shortly after he joined the first presidency, and he had this special mission with the consecrated lands, or the lands in Missouri, meaning Adamantium, Independence. And so during that time, he consulted Joseph Smith's original plan for the New Jerusalem, which you can find on the Joseph Smith papers, the website. Okay. You have the original plan, but then there's a revised plan. And there are 24 temples. That's what they are. They are temples that are supposed to be at the center of the city. 12 of them in one block, 12 of them on another block right next to each other. And so he consulted those plans because the church was worried about the city of Independence taking their land, because they were just like leaving it undeveloped. Whereas you had this like city that grew around it, and you have like this big empty land, just like in the middle of the city. And so they were worried that the city was like thinking about using eminent domain to take that land and then to turn it into like a school or something like that. And so the church didn't want that to happen. So the church decided, okay, fine. We'll use the land. And so Alvin R. Dyer, he consulted Joseph Smith's plan for New Jerusalem, and he determined which building, along with David O. McKay, the two of them determined which building, which temple, the visitor center that they were planning on building would be. So they built the structure to be for the time a visitor center. Okay, but they built it according to the revealed dimensions of what the temples are supposed to be, because the dimensions of the temple were revealed to Joseph Smith. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something something like 61 feet wide and 89 feet long or something like that. So they built the Independence Visitor Center to those specifications. And what the temples are supposed to look like are the Kirtland Temple, essentially. They virtually look the same. I don't know like the difference. Maybe there's different dimensions, maybe there's a few differences, but and that's on the Joseph Smith Papers website as well. You can see the plans for those temples. Had they been built, the plans are there. So at any given time, the church can decide to renovate the visitor center. They can change it drastically so that it matches perfectly what the original plans were. Like, that's not hard to do. If you have as much money as the church has, it can do anything. It could tear down the visitor center and then build a brand new temple, or they can just renovate it. Or maybe the Lord will reveal it's not necessary to make it look exactly like those original plans. Like, yes, keep the dimensions, but go ahead and leave the arches, and we'll do this and this and this inside the building. So the point is, there's already a temple there, and it can be changed at any time. For all anybody knows, maybe the Lord will be like, nope, just go ahead and let's go ahead and dedicate it right now. Just leave it. Just clear out the stuff. Like, let's clear out the stuff out of there, do some like minor renovations. But for right now, to fulfill prophecy, and so that, I come as a thief in the night, just clear it out. We'll dedicate it, and then we're good. Which makes me think, let's just do a little tangent. Makes me think about the BYU Jerusalem Center. I've made the case that could be turned into a temple. People are always like, it was never designed to be a temple. It doesn't have to be. You know what? The Provo City Center Temple, it was never designed to be a temple. But guess what? It is now a temple. The same thing with the Vernal Temple. The same thing with isn't it the Copenhagen Temple? Like, that was originally some other building. Any building can be turned into a temple. And the fact of the matter is that the 24 temples of New Jerusalem, they're not all temples like what we think of temples right now. They have different functions. They're not like, it's not like each one of them is going to have a baptismal font and ordinance rooms and sealing rooms and celestial rooms. It's not clear exactly what every single one of them would be used for, but there is a description of what they're called. They're actually given names. If you look at the plan, the revised city plat for New Jerusalem, and you turn it onto the back, it gives the names of all the temples. And it's clear that, like, in sets of 3, they're supposed to be for like each office in the priesthood. There's like 3 for deacons, there's 3 for teachers, there's 3 for priests. It's kind of weird. Alvin R. Dyer later on, I need to do a video about this. Maybe this will be my next video, because I still have a couple more videos I need to do for the New Jerusalem playlist. But he was like doing this kind of like interview with somebody from BYU talking about church education in the millennium. And he was talking about the fact that some of those buildings would be used as broadcast centers, like broadcasting, like for educational purposes, in that some of them would be for schools. So this Independence Visitor Center, it really is, it's a temple in waiting. And I don't think it's a temple like what we think of when we think of temples. And same with the BYU Jerusalem Center. I know it's not on the Mount. It's not on the Temple Mount. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe later on, that temple on the Temple Mount will be built. Maybe that temple is not going to be built through force. Like, maybe, the Dome of the Rock isn't going to be destroyed. Maybe it's just that we're going to start out with a temple on Mount Scopus, which is on the same ridge as the Mount of Olives. And that's how it's going to start. Maybe that'll be the Lord's administrative headquarters, is the BYU Jerusalem Center. And what's interesting is right now, it's not being used. At least there's no students there. I'm sure maybe there's still some things taking place. At least there's probably janitors that are watching it, making sure it's like maintained. I don't know. If you know more, let me know. But right now, it's not housing any students. So how do you and I know that just last night it wasn't dedicated as a temple? How would you know? We don't. It could happen at any time. It could be the same thing with the visitor center. Now, it's last I checked, the visitor center is still open. You know, at least it was in September when I went there. But you have to like consider these different possibilities. Sometimes we think that everything's going to be like so obvious. You know, we know that the second coming cannot possibly be soon because X, Y, and Z hasn't happened according to our picture in our heads of how it's supposed to happen. But we know that the second coming is supposed to come as a thief in the night, especially for the world, not so much for the saints. The saints should be able to look at the signs of the times and know the approximate time. But even for us, we don't know the day or the hour. And it's designed that way. Multiple general authorities have talked about the fact that it's designed that way so that even us, the Latter-day Saints, and even though we know it's coming soon, we're still being tested. In fact, this was brought up in the 2022 Christmas devotional. There was a talk by, I think it was Elder Anderson, and he was asking the question, you know, why didn't the prophet Nephi know that Christ was coming into the world until the day before? And the answer is because this is a test. It's a test. This is a test. That's the point of this life. And so I could see that same thing happening with New Jerusalem, the temple there, and then Old Jerusalem and the temple there. It seems to me that things are possibly prepped. I'm not saying that this is the case with the BYU Jerusalem Center, but I could see that being the case very easily. And I think there's going to be people that are caught off guard, that thought that they had all the time in the world because they had read the scriptures and had it all perfectly planned out, you know, a timeline, and they knew exactly how things were going to happen. I wouldn't be so sure. Maybe that's how it'll happen. Maybe. But it could easily happen other ways too, ways that you don't think. And it seems like a lot of times prophecy happens that way. And that's why even though prophecy happens, people have a hard time accepting it or following it because it's just not spectacular enough, or it's not supernatural enough. And even if it was, you know, some people won't even accept that. As is the case with Israel and the Red Sea being parted. There were still issues after, you know, they went through the Red Sea and they were wandering in the wilderness. So I don't know, but so just to recap, we have these eclipses, 3 of them. And if you look at them going backwards, it seems to be a timeline of this dispensation. Okay, if we're looking at the area, the locations that are in the path of totality, it's like a backwards timeline. Not perfectly, not as though if you were to go to the very last one and then you were to push rewind. If you were to do that, you would first see the eclipse go over Kirtland, Ohio, and then you go back over the Sacred Grove. So it's not like perfectly going backwards in that sense. Okay. But it is going backwards if you just go like day by day. So starting with the Sacred Grove, and then Kirtland, Ohio, with the April 8th, 2024 eclipse. And then you go back just a few months, 6 months, and then you have the eclipse that went over Utah. It missed all the temples except for one in operation. And then even further back, You go back to the 2017 eclipse, which is the one that goes over Adam and New Jerusalem, the center place. It seems like a backwards timeline. And that by itself is very interesting because it's already very unlikely that you would have these three eclipses and the locations that they go over. But on top of that, they're in the right order backwards. That's very odd. And it's almost certainly intentional, and it's meant to be a sign for those that take these things seriously. There's people that don't. They live too much according to this world, and nothing is ever a sign. Or if it's a sign, it has to be huge. It has to be magic. It can't be explained. You know, whereas others have eyes to see and ears to hear. When you see all these different disasters happening in the world at a greater intensity than before, and a higher frequency, it would seem, especially with all these like flooding events, that's definitely increased. That has definitely increased. Um, but there's all sorts of other things, wars, and just all the things that the scriptures talk about. Some people will write it off and be like, well, there's been earthquakes before, or we know, what that is. We can explain it. That's not the point. It doesn't matter if it's happened before. It doesn't matter if you can explain it. It doesn't have to be magic for it to be a sign. All it has to be is anything that puts an idea into your mind and you can feel the spirit testify to you that it's a sign. And there are a lot of times that things will happen in an unlikely way, I think, to kind of tip you off that it is a sign. But to have like, what's it called? But at the same time allowing for plausible deniability for those that, want to make the argument against it, so that you still have your agency, not that you wouldn't have it, have it anyway, but, just so you can like really make your choice and really show, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear or not. So, I'm really looking forward to it. What does it mean? I don't know. Is this is there going to be something that happens on that day? Could be, maybe. I did a video a while ago because there was this argument made for signs, and that signs are for things in the future. And that's not always the case. I went through the scriptures and found signs that are in the past, signs that are like for that time, like, oh, there's the sign, and then something happens like that day. And then there all are signs that point to the future, but there's all three types. So I came across scriptures where it said, like, okay, so this miracle happened. I had you perform this miracle so that future generations would know, looking back, that this is true. For example, the three witnesses, that's something that happened in the past, but it's a sign for us to look back at. It happened first, and then we saw it and we looked back to it. But there's other times that signs happen, and it's that day that something happens. For example, when Christ was born, like when Christ was born, a sign appeared in the heaven. And then in the Americas, you had the day and the night that was like day, and then the day, like the light. And then the opposite thing when he died, there was the 3 days of darkness, right? So those were signs of something that was concurrently happening. It was an indicator that something was actually happening then. But there are other signs that point to the future as well. So you have all three types. So we can't really say. Maybe something will happen on that day. Maybe something will happen before that day. Maybe something will happen after that day. No idea. It could be that these 7 years, maybe it's like a window in which major things are supposed to happen within these brackets. You know, maybe you just look at the last part of it, the Utah eclipse and the 2024 eclipse, and maybe that's kind of like a red zone. You know, like this is the period of time. Anytime between this eclipse and the 2024 eclipse, the second coming is going to happen. And when I say second coming, I mean coming to the Jews and appearing to the world. Because Adam-ondi-Ahman, that could also happen in a way that we don't quite understand. Joseph Fielding Smith said in, I can't remember the name of the book, A New Witness. I think it's called A New Witness. He said that he said that in large part, the saints will not know about it. And Bruce R. McConkie kind of says the same thing a little bit in Millennial Messiah. But anyway, just go watch that playlist, the Adam-ondi-Ahman playlist. And I go over all these quotes. So I'm not expecting, that I have to experience Adam-ondi-Ahman knowingly, because it could be that some of these general conference sessions, especially like the April 2020 general conference, that could have been a session of Adam-ondi-Ahman and us not know. I'm not expecting to physically be in Adam-ondi-Ahman before I'll accept that the second coming can happen, because that could happen in ways that you don't expect. Anyway, so with these eclipses, it could be that these are like windows of time in which something will happen. It could be that they are like a bracket or bookends to President Nelson's presidency. Because the first one happened just a few months before he became president of the church. And who knows what's going to happen between now and March. Maybe he'll pass away. I don't know. Maybe the second coming will happen, and then he'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye, and he'll move from mortality into immortality as a resurrected being. I don't know. Could be something like that. It could be that after the eclipse, then we know that we're really in the red zone. We had this really big sign between these three eclipses. Now that they're behind us, now we know things are like really, really serious now. And that's even more the case now that we have this war that's going on in Israel that seems to continue to escalate. There within recent days, I'm sure you've seen this, but I've seen different stories how Israel seems to be more and more likely to declare war on Hezbollah in the north, because they're talking about how this should be the topic for another video, but in short, they want their people to be able to return to their homes, because there's like this buffer zone along the border of Lebanon in Israel. Israel has created a buffer zone, and if you're in that buffer zone, you're evacuated. You can't be at your house because it's too dangerous. And so the crux of it, from what I can tell, is Israel's like, okay, look, at some point our people need to come back. So either you're going to stop or we're going to make you stop. That seems to be the buzz right now. So if that happens, I don't know. And then we have Iran that apparently has lost its mind. They've shot missiles into Syria and Iraq, claiming to be targeting, I think, Mossad, which is the Israel's, intelligence agency, attacking their assets, I guess, in Iraq and Syria, and not too far away from American assets. And then after that, I don't know if you heard this, but they also did like some kind of strike in Pakistan against like some other group. I was actually watching this recently, within the last like 12 hours or so, where at the World Economic Forum, I guess Iran's guy is there, and he was talking about the fact that there's this terrorist organization operating out of Iran, but they also have people over in across the border in Pakistan, and so they hit, you know, one of their installations, areas, whatever. So that's 3 different countries that have had Iranian missiles cross over their borders and into their territory, and they're not happy about that. So, and then there's the Houthis, that's still going on. There's been more strikes by the United States and the UK on the Houthis. So that's still going on, and the Houthis are still firing back. And then on top of that, okay, I'm going to save that for another video. Things are escalating. This is not the same as other conflicts that Israel's had. I really feel like this is a very good candidate for the final war, because it doesn't seem like there's an easy way out. And if anything, it just seems like things are going to continue to escalate. So, all right. Well, okay. So that's it for this one. You know, these eclipses, I hope that you take them seriously, because, you know, the Lord, he does things, and things are not coincidences. They usually are not coincidences, especially when it's like big things like this during this period of time, which is so much more chaotic compared to decades past. You know, it's happening now. Oh, and by the way, yeah, within these brackets between these two bookends, 2017 and 2024, we've had this worldwide pandemic. We've had President Nelson that's made all the different changes in the church, and he's announced all these temples. He broke the record. At first it was President Hinckley, but President Nelson passed him up as far as the prophet that's announced the most temples. And then we have this war going on with Russia and Ukraine, which we don't know how that's going to end. And then we have this war in Israel, and among many other things. You know, wildfires have been crazy during this window of time. So at the very least, it seems like it's highlighting these years, the President Nelson years. So yeah. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.